Okay, so imagine this. You're stepping into a war, a conflict that's going to last for 20 straight years, from 1900 all the way to 1920.
And it's happening in the Horn of Africa, which is an unforgiving landscape, even when there isn't a war going on.
Exactly. And here's the kicker. You have zero modern supply lines. I mean,
Yeah.
absolutely none. No external state support. Your enemies? Oh,
Under-
just the British Empire, the Kingdom of Italy, and the growing power of Ethiopia.
That is the reality, the almost unbelievable challenge that defined the life's work of Muhammad Abdullah Hassan. He was the leader of what became known as the Dervish movement in Somalia. We're looking at a military feat that, I mean, it's just staggering in its endurance.
And the sources we have show this huge disagreement about who he even was. European officials, the ones fighting him, they called him the Mad Mullah.
Right, just wrote him off as a fanatic.
But then you dig into the British archives, the archives of his enemy, and they admit he was, and this is a direct quote, the most remarkable Somali of his generation. How does that happen? How can one person be seen as both?
And that's the paradox we really need to get into. So for this deep dive, our mission is to look past those labels. We want to understand the mechanics of it. How did Hassan turn, religious preaching into a revolution, into a state?
A centralized state, no less.
A centralized state. And maybe even more importantly, why does the memory of this state, which, spoilers, ultimately failed, why does it still define modern Somali nationalism today?
Okay, let's unpack this, and I think we have to start at the beginning. The man's education is absolutely key to his mission. Hassan was born around 1856 near Buhudal. He wasn't. He wasn't supposed to be a warlord. He was a scholar.
A very serious one.
Eh.
He traveled all over the Islamic world, spent a lot of time studying in Mecca. He was deep in the Quran and Arabic tradition.
And during that time, he absorbed these really important reformist teachings, right? This wasn't just abstract theology.
No, not at all. These movements were all about purifying Islamic practice and, crucially, about actively resisting European colonial control. He got connected to the Salihiyya Sufi order, which gave him both a religious structure and a clear mandate to fight foreign interference.
So when he comes back to Somalia in the 1890s, he doesn't just see his home. He sees a full-blown crisis.
He sees Christian missionaries making inroads, European officials just drawing lines on maps.
Arbitrary lines, yeah, cutting across grazing lands that had been used for generations.
And he sees the tribal divisions getting deeper, which, the colonial powers were actively making worse. He refused to accept that world.
And that refusal turns into open defiance. In 1899, he formally declares jihad.
And the Dervish movement is born, the term dervish. It refers to a member of a Sufi order, but here they became spiritual warriors. Their mission was to defend their land, their faith, their sovereignty.
But wait, how did he manage to overcome those deep clan divisions so fast? I mean, that seems like the hardest part. Was just the call to religion enough to get these famously independent clans on the same page?
Well, it wasn't instant, but that religious framing was the key. It gave them a unifying ideology. And what's fascinating here is how he did it. He didn't just target the foreigners. He went after the internal collaborators.
Oh, local chiefs working with the British?
Exactly. He stood up and accused them of betraying Islam for money and power. And that was an incredibly powerful message. It created this us versus them that was bigger than just clan loyalty.
So he used religious law to delegitimize the entire colonial structure, from the British officials down to their local allies.
And it worked. That ability to unify all these different groups under the banner of Islam, that was his first and, maybe his most powerful political victory.
And that unity let them expand so quickly.
And start to actually govern.
Yeah, and here's where it gets really interesting. The sources just demolish this idea that the dervishes were some ragtag militia. By 1900, just a year in, they controlled huge parts of northern Somalia, and they were building a real state.
They moved so fast to create the structures of a state. They were minting their own coins, for instance.
Real coins?
Copper and silver, yeah. They set up courts to administer Islamic law, and they maintained formal foreign correspondence. This wasn't just about fighting a war. It was about claiming legitimacy on the world stage.
Okay, hang on. Foreign correspondence. In the middle of the Horn of Africa at the turn of the century, who are they talking to?
I mean, that detail alone shows you how sophisticated they were. They were writing to the Ottoman Empire, who they still saw as the leader of the caliphate, asking for recognition, for aid.
Did they get any?
Very little in the end. But they also wrote to other Islamic resistance movements in the region. They were trying to build a whole network. This was serious diplomacy.
And nothing says we're here to stay, like building a capital city, which they did at Tella around 1910.
And Talley wasn't just some camp. It was a massive, fortified city. We're talking huge stone walls, barracks, prisons, mosques, even royal residences. It was built to last. The British officers who saw it later were just stunned. They realized it was a planned city built for permanent governance.
So it wasn't just a fortress, it was a political statement.
It was Somalia's first real attempt at a central state. You could almost call it a proto-republic, but one where legitimacy came from Islamic law and a council of scholars, not from a colonial mandate or clan elders. They had taxes, a regulated economy, and a standing army.
An organized army with regiments and command structures.
A real army, not a militia.
But if they were so organized, why did the British just treat it like a minor issue at first? Surely they saw it was being built.
They underestimated the ideology. They thought they could just pay off a few chiefs and it would all go away. And geographically, the dervishes were surrounded. You had the British on the coast, Italians to the south, Ethiopians to the west. It was a really vulnerable position.
Which forced them into this defensive war that lasted for 2 decades.
20 years. With no resupply. That resilience alone is just, it's a historical marvel.
How did they do it? How do you keep 3 empires at bay for that long?
It all came down to their knowledge of the land. The deserts, the wells, the mountain passes. They used classic, brutal guerrilla tactics. They'd hit a supply line, ambush a patrol, and then just melt back into the desert where the colonial armies couldn't follow.
They were basically mastering guerrilla warfare decades before it became a formal doctrine in the West.
Absolutely. But you're right, we shouldn't forget their conventional strength either. The sources talk about the Battle of Jidbali in 1904, a huge victory against the Ethiopians.
Yeah, it's described as one of the bloodiest battles in Somali history.
And it shattered that early perception of them as just raiders. British reports from that time are filled with this sort of shocked respect. They realized they were facing a disciplined, unified force. They knew their ground campaigns weren't working.
So the war just grinds on for years, draining British resources until World War I ends. And by 1919, London's patience is gone. They decide it's time to end it for good.
And this is the turning point. This is where you see the sheer ruthlessness of modern empire. The British knew ground troops would just keep failing, so they turned to technology, overwhelming technology.
Which brings us to January 1920, and a devastating historical first.
That's when the Royal Air Force launched the first organized aerial bombardment in African history, right against the Dervish strongholds.
Planes! They brought in airplanes.
Exactly. A weapon, a terror the dervishes had never seen and had no concept of how to fight. They bombed Taleh, Jadali, all the major forts, and you can't overstate the psychological impact of that.
All the stone walls, the permanent cities they had built for 20 years.
Flattened from the sky. By a weapon they couldn't even reach. Their entire infrastructure was just gone.
The ultimate asymmetry. Hassan was forced to flee Tella, escape into the desert with the RAF hunting him.
And that was effectively the end. He survived for a few more months, but he died in December 1920. Not from a bullet, but from influenza. The steed he built was literally crushed from the air.
But that physical defeat is, like you said, only half the story. To understand why he's still so important, we have to look away from the warrior and look at the poet.
Precisely. His real legacy, the enduring part, is in the culture. He was an amazing poet, and his verses are preserved in Somali oral history. They were recited everywhere. They were his most effective weapon.
Because they weren't just poems, they were propaganda, right? To rally his fighters, but also to mock his opponents. He used satire to shame the chiefs who collaborated.
And his poetry makes his mission so clear. It wasn't about personal power. He has this one famous line that just says it all. I am the one who will not be ruled, the one who guards the faith.
That one line explains everything. It explains why you get these two views, the fanatic versus the martyr. But it's clear he saw himself as a protector of dignity.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, that memory, the story of the Dervish state, it became the blueprint for what came next. The state collapsed, but the dream didn't. The old men who fought with Hassan became the mentors for the young leaders of the independence movements in the 40s and 50s.
So the Dervish story directly fueled the creation of the modern Somali Republic.
It absolutely did. And it's a powerful reminder, especially today, that Somali unity isn't some hypothetical idea. It was achieved. It was real, even if it was born in conflict and ended brutally.
He was fighting for the right to define himself, to define his people, and today he's been reclaimed by Somalis as Sayyid Mohammed Abdullah Hassan, their symbol of resistance.
Yeah, they put him up there with figures like Omar Mukhtar in Libya or Imam Shamil in the Caucasus. It's part of that global story of anti-colonial struggle.
So after all this, what does it all mean? Hassan left nothing behind, no wealth, no palace. The state he built was destroyed. But his legacy is all about conviction, isn't it? It even survived his own defeat.
I think so. The sources all suggest that, at its core, his jihad was a resistance to humiliation. He refused to let his people's dignity be stolen, and he left behind this really challenging question that I think every modern Somali inherits, and that, frankly, we should all think about.
What does independence even mean if it isn't protected by self-respect? By a willingness to defend your own identity? His entire life suggests that, for him, it was always better to die free than to live as a subject. And that idea, that powerful